Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it's time for another news roundup podcast episode. I'm here with assistant editor Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Hey, Eamon.
Pleased to be here, Jason.
And we have a range of topics to step through today. Some interesting recent announcements and news from the channel, from Microsoft themselves, as well as some expert articles to call out as well. Where should we begin?
Well, I know one of the things that's been an interesting discussion recently is Microsoft's announcement on July 5th that they're going to be canceling internal use rights for partners. This has gotten a lot of partners pretty concerned with sort of the changes in how they are able to use the Microsoft stack. And certainly we've seen some significant concern from many MVPs and past leaders in the partner community around this issue.
Yeah, this really ties into some of the other concerns I think that have been building among partners in recent months. Changes to competencies, changes to fees related to support, changes related to selling through AppSource, and fees that are being levied there as well, and what all these changes say about Microsoft's priorities. I think with regard to the internal use rights, there have been different viewpoints on this, ranging from on the one hand, that sort of maybe you call it acceptance that Microsoft's going in a slightly different direction, and partners really just need to catch up and sort of adapt, to really frustration and maybe bewilderment among some that they're focused on their customers. They're trying to give, as they would say, their customers the best possible support and experience. And with these changes, it really hurts them and their ability to deliver. Just as an anecdote, I was talking to one partner in the last couple of days about this, and he told me that just again through his conversations, he's heard that some partners expect significant impact by the loss of internal use rights. I thought it was just looking at it myself, I thought the numbers were going to be, maybe impactful to the really, really small low end of the type of partner. But some partners are talking about, $10,000 or more per month in benefits that they are going to be losing, which just comes right off, right out of their budget, and could mean, an FTE, or could mean, just a lower ability to operate in the channel. So I think the place where this is really going to start to work itself out is at Inspire next week. It's where and since this came out right before Inspire, I do imagine that we'll be hearing more about how partners communicate to Microsoft their concerns and how Microsoft responds if there's any added detail or any adjustment or any concessions or anything else to sort of color this decision in the coming week. So certainly something to watch out for.
And I think one of the things that's so interesting about it is that this fits into a broader pattern where Microsoft really does seem to be pruning its partner community, focusing more on verticals, as some people have noted, and really emphasizing larger, more consolidated partners to do business with, as opposed to the smaller players, where if you're not a super specialist small player, they maybe aren't as interested as they would have been in the past to engage with you.
Absolutely. And I think that, I would not be surprised if sort of the pure dollars and cents aspect of this really ends up being one of the main reasons. I mean, if it's true that, if one partner is going to be losing, $10,000 a month or more of benefits, then there's probably lots of partners that would be in the same position if that is in fact true. And to some extent, Microsoft, someone in accounting or business development could have looked at some of these numbers and said, we're leaving huge amounts of money on the table, whereas we used to just be giving them a DVD and a license code, which really cost us. The marginal cost was almost nothing. Now all of a sudden we're running servers in the cloud and for dozens to maybe even 100 users, depending on their competency and certification levels. Maybe it's time for that to end, and partners need to pay their own way. I mean, maybe that could be part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. That aspect of the actual very real costs of cloud The electricity costs, the equipment and continual maintenance, and the security for all that is certainly a big cost that Microsoft has to bear now, where in the past it really was, as you're saying, sort of an easy thing to hand out to people.
Yeah. So I mean, again, it remains to be seen. I think we'll get a better picture probably after next week.
One of the other articles we had recently, a great opportunity on my part, was to chat with Clément Olivier. He's a Microsoft MVP based in France, working for Javista, a IT services company in the greater Paris area. And my interview with him really fits into a couple of great conversations I've been having recently about the sort of localization aspect of the Microsoft stack across Azure and Dynamics and so forth. And where he sits, he has an opportunity to work primarily with schools and banks in France, and had a lot of very interesting perspectives on clients who are primarily on-prem still, but who he's sort of working with to begin the very beginnings of the transition to the cloud. And it seems like, sort of in line with things I've heard from other MVPs focused, for instance, in the Canadian market, through some of our Azure coverage, there's a great deal of concern about where data is housed, both for Dynamics and for more general Azure workloads. And that's certainly very, very true in France, where there's considerable concern about anonymizing data for schools after students have come and gone, but retaining as much insight as they possibly can, all while making sure that that data is housed, at least in Europe, and in some cases for certain workloads within the geographic borders of France.
Yeah, it's a great reminder of sort of what Microsoft customers look like on the ground in a particular country, in a particular region, and how their individual organizations' concerns reflect the sort of broader you know nation's priorities, I guess you would say, or sort of regulatory priorities of that country or of that region, and it gives a bit of a measure of the pace at which kind of the overall market is going to move, because it's certainly not the only. You've identified two great examples of it, and there's just so much diversity in approach and in in sort of mindset on these things. So it's always worth remembering that this is the kind of, I'm sure every partner would love all their clients to be in the cloud, and Microsoft obviously would, but it's really just not where everyone is at right now. And so partners have to make sense of it. IT managers at these companies also have to make sense of it, and work within the rule, sort of the rules or the guidance that they're supposed to follow.
And in some ways, Microsoft has to take the lead on that in many respects. One of the points that Olivier was making was that essentially in France, the opening of a new data center for Dynamics recently, I think within the past year, has had a significant effect in spurring that migration to the cloud, where previously perhaps there wasn't as much data center capacity there, leaving open more uncertainty about whether data would be housed internally or perhaps, say, in the Netherlands or Germany or something like that, which could run afoul of ever-changing data protection laws put out by the government in Paris.
Right, great point. Yeah, I was going to also mention that it's interesting, to see how important some of those investments are in terms of data centers and location of them in various countries. And I think, that stream of kind of ongoing news about, capital investment in these data centers is just going to continue just to reach, those kinds of market needs.
Of course, one of the broad trends we've seen lately is ever more integration with the Power Platform and the Common Data Service. Jason, could you tell me a little bit more of your insights on the PowerApps Portals announcement that came out just a few weeks back?
Yeah, so I mean, the big reveal for this really was around the Business Apps Summit event, which is now several weeks back. But this was really the coming out party for PowerApps Portals. It's really the continuation of the Portal legacy that came out of ADX Studio and became Dynamics 365 Portals. And those don't go away, but they kind of become PowerApps Portals really without any change. I mean, I think it's essentially a branding change for any existing portals out there. And this is one of those sort of D365 kind of juicy details to keep a watch for at Inspire. Everything about PowerApps Portals seems really great, and it seems to it's kind of becoming a third type of Power App, along with model driven and Canvas apps, and Portals will be sort of a third type, maybe not officially. I don't know. You could probably debate whether that's a totally accurate statement, but the really interesting thing about it is that it, like any other D365 portals and the old ADX Studio portals, it can be used to expose enterprise data in a more public or sort of to outside users, whether it's anonymous or authenticated, but outsiders. Microsoft has a strategy, sort of a technical architecture for supporting that, for letting outside people get access to these enterprise systems and processes. They have they've obviously put a lot of thought, as I kind of outlined in the piece, into what the portals, how the portals can be built, what they can support, what they can integrate with, how they do authentication, like I said, or handle anonymous users. What they don't, what they have not explained, the one big detail was how they're going to license this, and how they're going to allow for bringing licensed data, if you want to call it that, data from licensed user-driven applications into a portal, whereas Canvas-driven and Canvas and model-driven apps do have those restrictions on them. So it'll be very interesting. I mean, if I had to guess, I was going to say it would be like maybe a consumption-based, consumption-based approach or something, but. Portals I think are a huge opportunity with the business applications suite at Microsoft, and I think it's good news that they've sort of modernized it around PowerApps.
Do you expect any more details to come out about that at something like Inspire this summer?
Yeah, I think they will give some kind of a plan on how they're going to license this, because they sort of promised it, and I just don't see how that. I mean, unless they were going to delay the launch, I don't see how they could hold it off any further. But we'll see.
One of the other areas we've been doing some coverage on lately is the question of the governance of the Power Platform, and this is a really, really interesting topic. I know that you've delved into a bit, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the writing I did on this kind of goes back to the BizApps Summit, and one of the things I think they did a nice job at that event was really recruiting a lot of sort of enterprise sized customers who are using Flow and PowerApps already, and who have started to build centers of excellence and standardize on Power Platform. Especially in more complex scenarios, and I believe there's quite a few videos of these presentations out there now, including from companies like Chevron, Schlumberger, other energy companies. There's quite a few energy companies, but also some public sector kind of things. There's the Calgary Library is doing some interesting things with Flow. But on the governance side, essentially what I took from it was, very seasoned IT managers and executives are looking at this stack and saying, here's how we're going to sort of apply our corporate style of management to these tools that were originally built as sort of, user-centric, sort of go it alone, do it yourself, explore and be innovative types of tools. We're going to put sort of our bureaucratic corporate management structure around them. We're going to have like levels of, levels of development and levels of sort of access that we're going to give. We're going to, govern this the way we would govern anything else. And so I think Microsoft is thrilled about that IT managers are finding a way to do that at, big publicly traded, companies with lots of compliance requirements and data loss prevention policies, and that they're fitting it into that, I think, is a big deal. And even Microsoft, I think, part of just to add, I think one of the bits that was important for Microsoft is they even put out their own sort of center of excellence guide, which I think we linked to in the article. So sort of to help push other IT departments into sort of building out, making Power Platform, building a center of excellence around Power Platform.
We've also broadly seen a lot of efforts to really grow the usage of Flow as this process automation platform, as I know you're sort of touching on, for all kinds of different instances. But that's been a sort of a subset of all of this, is really encouraging enhanced sort of coverage for administrators on how to handle development, execution, support, and governance with that. Although it's still very much an open question that a lot of organizations are still debating how they're going to put that into place.
Yeah, I was as my mind sort of worked away there. I think I just blended those two topics together because we sort of covered them separately. But yeah, I think it's all part of the same. In a sense, it's part of the same message that Microsoft's putting out there, making more sophisticated tools for Flow. Um, they are adding more sophisticated sort of computing capabilities, whether it's tying in Power BI in new ways, tying in this AI builder, which I think we'll touch on more in just a moment. Um, so yeah, I think really it's trying to mature the platform very, very quickly.
So you certainly mentioned the topic of AI Builder. I'll just add that the Business Application Summit was also an opportunity for Microsoft to tout its mixed reality technology for Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform, integrated essentially with HoloLens. And this was really interesting. They had a lot of very well put together examples. Particularly the examples they chose, many of them had to do with transportation. Alaska Airlines, for instance, servicing their jets with essentially HoloLens devices to guide workers through the basic process, where there was almost a preloaded aspect to training, so that they could go through and learn the basic steps of doing a repair without quite as much hands-on guidance from a coach or a more senior employee. And very similarly, PACCAR, the company that owns Peterbilt trucks and a number of other heavy equipment manufacturers, is doing much the same thing for their workers. So it's very interesting to see those real-world examples. They just happen to all be from transportation or manufacturing for transportation, but clearly something that has applications much more broadly than that.
Yeah, I was initially a little unsure what I thought of the use of mixed reality and tying that to the Dynamics 365 brand. But as I've seen those products evolve, it really does make a lot more sense. Guides is a great example. Anything where sort of employee based or sort of operational data is stored back to it is involved, either pulling it into a mixed reality scenario or saving it back out of a mixed reality scenario, I guess you'd say. Um, yeah, I'm pretty much sold on the idea that that's all data that really belongs, needs to be managed and should be available for analysis, available for improving processes and so forth. And yeah, I got the sense that Microsoft's the teams it's putting together around mixed reality business apps, as opposed to just the sort of the HoloLens device itself and some of the visualization and other technology within just the sort of the device, HoloLens, and probably soon HoloLens 2. Uh, it's real, and it seems like a real investment that, and so it was a really nice chance to do an interview with Edo Demartine, GM of that mixed reality group, and who he happens to focus on guides. So I really got to really explore that with him. So that was a great opportunity, a nice interview that I was glad to be able to do.
Before we move on and talk about some of our recent outstanding expert content, I just wanted to touch briefly on the topic of the AI builder that's been announced also at Business Application Summit, and get your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I think it's a maybe an expected or a necessary next step for Microsoft and pretty much for any other cloud enterprise software company these days. They need to say that they have a way to expose machine learning tools and scenarios and cognitive services in a way that is accessible to those companies that don't have a data science sort of team internally who really understands how to build those kinds of things at scale. So giving kind of pre-built packages where you can really kind of take your data and train a model quickly is going to be almost like table stakes, I think, in this race between these enterprise cloud providers going forward. So AI Builder really is that for now for Microsoft, and I think it's a really interesting proposition. Very early days. I would be pretty careful if I was trying to use it right now to see how much of it's really valuable and how much of it is still kind of raw or whether all of it's ready for prime time, I guess is what I'm saying. But partners I talked to, I think I quoted at least one or two in a piece I did on it, had good things to say about the preview. They had specific plans of how they wanted to use certain elements of it with their own clients, and I think if partners can incorporate AI Builder into flows, into CRM scenarios, into other sort of very sort of easy wins, and create some easy wins for their customers with it, where they really do realize the benefits without having to be data science experts. And it could really get some quick traction. I mean, I think it certainly got that potential.
Speaking with all kinds of different experts, we've had a lot of interesting content lately related to the question of really just all of this kind of management integration. And there's one conversation in particular that really stands out to me in this area. A conversation I had with Ahmad Najjar. He's an MVP based in Oslo, Norway. And his area of focus is pretty broad on a number of different customers there, including Norwegian Railways. And in his role, he really integrates quite a bit from the Power Platform and stuff from Azure. And he had a lot of really interesting insights on when you use Flow versus when you use LogicApps. Actually, I'll quote from him right here because I think it's a great quote. LogicApps is like the big brother of Microsoft Flow, and it's good for integration. I like to get my hands dirty with what I do. It's a little bit different working with LogicApps. Flow is like the abstract of LogicApps, but LogicApps does more sophisticated scenarios and more expanded volume. You can do LogicApps with Visual Studio or combine it with PowerShell. LogicApps has more of the depth in application lifecycle management, while Flow is trying to get those capabilities more broadly available. I thought that was a great, just really brief, but very to the point summary of making decisions about which scenario you might use each of those functionalities with.
Yeah, and it kind of fits well with another explanation I heard from I believe it was Steven Siciliano, who's I forget his exact title. He's either a GM or a program manager for Flow itself, and he also made the same point, I think, in again at the BizApp Summit, that Flow and LogicApps are like siblings. That Flow is not a simplified version of LogicApps. It's different. It's not the same. But they're now being sort of positioned as serving two very different purposes. Flow is really for integrating processes and systems, sort of at the user level, and LogicApps has, I think, to Ahmad's point, is for, I guess, more sophisticated scenarios that don't involve process. I think that don't involve sort of workflow, sort of user workflow. And there's probably more. I'm sure there's more to say about it. I'm not perfectly representing the explanation, but just that idea that they sort of both sit sort of side by side and are built on the same technology, but are designed to serve different purposes. And it was great to hear his Ahmad's perspective on it, and I think we'll even get more clarity on that as time goes on, sort of where solution architects are selecting one or the other, and how they both sort of evolved to their own strengths.
We also had a really nice article recently from Alexander Ermakov, and he had a lot of really interesting things to say about the finance where I'm from topic, looking at Russia and the tax and accounting perspective there using Dynamics. And it really does seem like it's a complicated setup. Along with Brazil, China, and India, Russia is one of the markets where things can get pretty complicated from a tax perspective while using Dynamics 365 or really any other Dynamics system. In part because laws tend to change very quickly there. He made the point that unlike sort of more standardized accounting in much of Europe, the United States, and Canada, Russia hasn't quite adopted the very common IFRS accounting standards or the GAAP standards used in the U.S. And for the time being has remained much more interested in physical documentation that wouldn't necessarily be the case in Europe. So you have to have physical documentation of everything, which gets a little complicated when you're logging that all in a software system. So there's all kinds of stuff that people need to consider when they're operating in Russia. For instance, he makes the point that invoices are completely different in Russia than what people may be used to in the European and American markets.
Right. Yeah, I really can't add much to what he said. It really is a wonderful sort of explanation of and shows his depth of expertise.
One other article we had recently was by Michelle Toppers. He's the sales and delivery director for High Software, and it focuses on sort of the changes going on in the rental industry and what people should consider when they're setting up pricing for that. And there's a lot of really, really interesting takeaways in there. All kinds of stuff about account servitization, as well as sort of considering billing by rental period, rental per consumption, project hours, financial leasing, and all kinds of other insights like that. So I definitely encourage readers to check that out because it's a very useful resource. Of course, another great question for companies working with Dynamics: are marketers using Microsoft Dynamics effectively? That's a question that was posed in a recent article we had called How to Leverage Managed Execution Services for Marketing Technology in Microsoft Dynamics. And Jason, what was your thoughts on this?
It's a concept or an argument I have heard before, and I think this particular piece summarizes it well. The idea that you know companies have a marketing automation or have marketing technology, but they have trouble applying sort of a strategy. Applying the technology in the context of a strategy. And I know it's something, this was written by Paul Colella at Click Dimensions. Paul is a real veteran of the Microsoft channel and the CRM space. And Click Dimensions, I know, has been ramping up sort of their ability to offer some marketing services. So I think that's sort of reflected in this piece. But I think it's, the piece is coming out of a real need that I'm sure the Click Dimensions team sees probably more than anyone else, that when it comes to marketing technology, it's not as simple as just implementing the software. It really requires a certain amount of being able to develop the strategy and then apply it to the technology. And so, yeah, I'd recommend anyone thinking about how or where to sort of invest in marketing tech, or what to do with the systems they already have, give it a read.
As we look ahead to the next month, Jason, what do you think are some of the big topics we'll be hearing about at the upcoming Inspire conference?
Well, I think some of these decisions that I mentioned early on, just to bring it back to those, I think partners are going to have a lot of questions about what does it all mean, why, and I don't think it's going to be as much about the products at this one. And I don't think it's going to be about the licensing as much. I mean, I know there's that one interesting bit about Portal, but I think this event sounds like it's really going to boil down to sort of partner programs, partner support, sales motions, as they call it at Microsoft, and what the future of some of these competencies and programs are going to be. So I won't be at the event. There is some news coming out, I believe, on Thursday of this week. From Microsoft that they've been sort of starting to brief the press on, but I think it'll be another well-attended event, and a lot of partners really trying to take a measure of where Microsoft is going next, what Microsoft's own priorities are, because that's ultimately all that I think all that really matters for the partners is trying to read that and adapt to it.
I imagine there will be a lot of taking stock, especially in light of things like the change in internal use rights this past week.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially with these smaller partners, there's always, I think these days there's a lot of, I don't want to say concern, but certainly awareness that, if you are smaller, you're a little more sort of vulnerable to changes, of course, and, changes of priority at Microsoft, and being agile enough it's just a huge business challenge if you're really committed to the Microsoft channel. And that's one of the interesting things, I think, going back to the IUR stuff, is some of the people who spoke up and wrote about their take on it. It was unhappiness, but will they actually change their business, or will they change their business mix? It doesn't sound like a lot of them will. They'll adapt. Not too many seem to be suggesting it was really going to sort of significantly alter the direction of their businesses. But people will probably gather a lot more information at Inspire and make their decisions.
Well, Jason, it's been great discussing some of our recent content and some of the big changes we've seen in the channel over the past month.
Always fun to catch up like this, Eamon. We'll have to do it again in the next couple of weeks here. Thanks for helping me do it.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up. This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. Thanks for joining. You can reach out Jay Gumpert at msdynamicsworld.com with questions, comments, and input. And until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.